He's on t-shirts, posters, and dorm room walls around the world. The face of revolution. The romantic rebel who fought for the poor and the oppressed. But who was Che Guevara really? What did the man behind the iconic image actually do each day? Was he truly the hero that millions believe him to be? Or was there a darker side hidden beneath the beret and the beard? Let's strip away the mythology and look at what Che Guevara's daily life was really like. Ernesto Che Guevara was not a man who enjoyed comfort or routine. His daily life changed drastically depending on where he was and what phase of his revolutionary career he was in. But certain patterns remained consistent throughout his life. He was driven, obsessive, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. And that conviction would lead him to do things that many of his admirers today would find deeply disturbing. During the Cuban Revolution in the late 1950s, Che's days in the Sierra Maestra Mountains started early, usually before dawn. Sleep was a luxury he rarely indulged in. He might get 4 or 5 hours on a good night, often less. He would wake up in whatever makeshift camp the guerrillas had set up, surrounded by his fighters. The accommodations were primitive. No beds, just the ground, or a hammock if he was lucky. No running water, no electricity, no comfort of any kind. The first thing Che did each morning was read. This might surprise people who think of him only as a man of action, but Che was obsessed with reading. He carried books with him everywhere, even in the jungle during active combat. Philosophy, poetry, economics, military strategy. He would read anything he could get his hands on: Marx, Lenin, Freud, Neruda. He saw himself as an intellectual revolutionary, not just a fighter. He believed that understanding theory was just as important as knowing how to fire a rifle. After reading, usually with terrible coffee, he prepared for the day's work. Made over a campfire, Che would begin his rounds. He was a commander, and he took that responsibility seriously. He would check on his men, inspect their weapons, assess their morale. He was known for being extremely demanding. He expected total dedication and would not tolerate weakness or complaints. If a fighter wasn't performing up to his standards, Che would confront them directly. He could be harsh, even cruel in his criticism. But here's where things get dark. Che Guevara was not just a military commander, he was also judge, jury, and executioner. During the revolution and immediately after, Che personally oversaw the execution of hundreds of people. Some were soldiers from Batista's regime, the dictator the revolutionaries were fighting against, but others were simply people accused of being traitors, spies, or counter-revolutionaries. Many received no real trial, no proper defense, just a brief hearing, often conducted by Che himself and followed by execution by firing squad. Che didn't hide from this. He even seemed proud of it. He wrote in his diary about the executions as if they were necessary administrative tasks. He established La Cabana. He used the fortress in Havana as a prison and execution center, and he spent many evenings there signing death warrants. Witnesses reported that he would sometimes watch the executions personally, showing no emotion as men were shot. Some estimates put the number of people killed under his direct orders at over 500, though the exact number is disputed. What is not disputed is that Che believed violence was not just necessary but noble. He wrote that hatred was a valid revolutionary tool, that a true revolutionary must become an effective, violent, selective, and cold killing machine. By mid-morning during the Cuban Revolution, Che would be dealing with strategy and logistics. Guerrilla warfare is not just about fighting. It is about supply lines, communication, and keeping your forces fed and armed. Che was meticulous about these details. He would meet with other commanders, including Fidel Castro, to plan attacks, discuss intelligence, and coordinate movements. These meetings could last for hours, with Che chain-smoking cigars and arguing his positions passionately. One thing most people do not know about Che is that he suffered from severe asthma. It plagued him his entire life. In the jungle, without proper medication, it could have killed him. He would have attacks where he could not breathe, wheezing and gasping for air, but he refused to let it slow him down. He saw his own physical suffering as a test of revolutionary will. If he could push through his illness, then others had no excuse for weakness. Lunch was whatever could be found or carried. Often it was rice, beans, maybe some dried meat if they were lucky. Che ate the same food as his men. He believed in leading by example, at least in some ways. He would never ask his fighters to endure something he would not endure himself. This earned him respect, even from those who feared him. Afternoons were often spent on military operations, planning ambushes, raiding supply convoys, attacking isolated government outposts. Che was a talented military tactician when it came to guerrilla warfare. He understood how to use terrain, how to strike quickly and disappear, how to keep larger forces off balance. He was fearless in combat, often positioning himself at the front of attacks. Some saw this as bravery. But Che wasn't just fighting in Cuba. After the revolution succeeded in 1959, he became a key figure in the new Cuban government. His daily routine changed dramatically. Now he had an office in Havana. He was put in charge of various positions, including running the National Bank of Cuba and later the Ministry of Industries. These roles revealed something important about Che. He was a much better revolutionary than he was an administrator. As a government official, Che's days involved endless meetings, paperwork, and decision-making about economic policy. He approached these tasks with the same intensity he had brought to warfare, but with far less success. He implemented radical economic policies based on his Marxist ideology, many of which failed spectacularly. He believed in moral incentives over material ones, thinking that revolutionary consciousness could replace the need for wages and bonuses. Workers were expected to labor for the glory of the revolution, not for personal gain. Unsurprisingly, productivity plummeted. Che would arrive at his office early, often by 7 a.m., and work late into the night. He demanded the same from everyone around him. He had little patience for bureaucracy or people who could not keep up with his pace. He would berate officials who disappointed him, sometimes publicly. He saw himself as incorruptible, a pure revolutionary surrounded by people who were less committed than he was. During his time in government, Che also became involved in spreading revolution internationally. He believed that Cuba's revolution was just the beginning, that all of Latin America needed to be liberated through armed struggle. He spent time training guerrilla fighters from other countries, giving lectures on revolutionary theory, and planning international operations. He saw himself as a global revolutionary, not just a Cuban one. But Cuba eventually felt too small for Che. He was restless, uncomfortable with the relative stability and bureaucratic nature of running a government. By the mid-1960s, he was looking for new revolutions to join. He attempted to start guerrilla movements in the Congo and Africa, and later in Bolivia in South America. Both efforts were disasters. In Bolivia, where Che spent the last year of his life, his daily routine returned to the harsh reality of guerrilla warfare. He was back in the jungle, back to survival mode. But this time, things were different. The local peasants did not support him the way Cuban peasants had. The Bolivian Communist Party refused to help him. His guerrilla band was small, isolated, and constantly hunted by the Bolivian army, which was being trained and supported by the CIA. Che's days in Bolivia were marked by hunger, exhaustion, and his worsening asthma. He could barely breathe at the high altitude. His inhaler ran out. He was slowly falling apart physically. His diary from this period reveals a man who was struggling but refused to give up his mission. He still believed he could spark a continent-wide revolution even as everything around him was collapsing. His fighters were dying or deserting. They were hungry, sick, and demoralized. Che tried to maintain discipline and morale through force of will, but it was not working. The local population was afraid of his group, seeing them as foreign troublemakers, not liberators. The romantic image of the revolutionary hero was crashing into the brutal reality of a failed campaign. On October 8, 1967, Che's guerrilla band was ambushed by Bolivian soldiers. He was wounded and captured. The next day, on October 9th, he was executed in a small schoolhouse. He was 39 years old. His last words were reportedly to his executioner, "I know you've come to kill me. Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man." After his death, Che Guevara became more powerful as a symbol than he ever was as a living man. His image was turned into the most reproduced photograph in history. Students, activists, and rebels around the world wear his face on their clothing, often without knowing much about what he actually did or believed. The irony is thick. Che Guevara, the anti-capitalist revolutionary, has been turned into a capitalist commodity. His image sells merchandise worth millions. People who have never read his writings or learned about his actions wear his face as a fashion statement. He has been sanitized, romanticized, and stripped of context. So what did Che Guevara actually do all day? He read revolutionary theory, commanded guerrilla fighters, and ordered executions without hesitation. He worked tirelessly for a cause he believed in, but he also created suffering in the name of that cause. He was a complex man, intelligent, dedicated, and fearless, but also rigid, violent, and convinced that the ends justified any means. He wasn't the simple hero that his iconic image suggests, nor was he a simple villain. He was something more complicated and more human than either extreme. The question we should ask ourselves is this: can we separate the romantic myth of revolution from the violent reality of what it actually takes to overthrow a system? And should icons like Che be celebrated without understanding the full truth of their actions? Let us know what you think in the comments below. When you think of Nazi Germany's propaganda machine, one name stands above all others: Joseph Goebbels. But what did the man behind the lies actually do each day? Did he spend every hour crafting speeches and spreading hatred? Or was there something even darker hiding behind his carefully controlled public image? What does a day in the life of one of history's most dangerous propagandists really look like? Let's pull back the curtain and see the man who turned deception into an art form. Joseph Goebbels woke up early, much earlier than Adolf Hitler. Unlike the Führer, who slept until late morning, Goebbels was usually awake by 7 a.m., sometimes even earlier. He believed in discipline and structure, and his mornings reflected that belief. The first thing he did each day was read. Not just any reading. He consumed newspapers from across Germany and even foreign press from countries like Britain, France, and the United States. He wanted to know what the world was saying about Nazi Germany, and more importantly, what they were saying about him. While still in bed or over breakfast, Goebbels would flip through page after page, his mind already working on how to twist the news, how to respond, how to shape the narrative. He kept detailed notes in the margins, circling stories that angered him or inspired new propaganda angles. This wasn't casual reading, it was reconnaissance. He was hunting for weaknesses in enemy morale, looking for stories he could manipulate, and scanning for any criticism of the Nazi regime that needed to be crushed. Breakfast itself was simple. Goebbels ate lightly, usually bread, butter, jam, and coffee. He wasn't interested in long, drawn-out meals like Hitler. He wanted to get to work. By 8:30 or 9 a.m., he was already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits, his hair slicked back, his appearance meticulous. Goebbels was short in stature and had a limp from a childhood illness, something that had haunted him his entire life. He overcompensated for this with obsessive attention to how he looked and how he was perceived. Every detail mattered to him: his clothes, his posture, even the way he entered a room. By mid-morning, Goebbels was at his office in the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda in Berlin. This was his kingdom. From this building, he controlled nearly every piece of information that entered the minds of millions of Germans. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, films, books, art, music, Nothing escaped his reach. He had created a system where truth didn't matter. Only the story he wanted people to believe mattered. His mornings were filled with meetings. Editors from major newspapers would arrive to receive their daily instructions. Goebbels didn't just suggest what to write. He commanded it. He told them which stories to print on the front page, which ones to bury, and which ones to ignore completely. He decided how to frame every event, every battle, every speech. If Germany lost a battle, he would spin it as a strategic retreat. If civilians were suffering, he would blame it on Jewish conspirators or foreign enemies. He was a master at controlling the message, and he did it with chilling precision. But Goebbels wasn't just managing the press, he was orchestrating hatred. One of the most horrifying parts of his daily routine was his active role in promoting anti-Semitic propaganda. He personally oversaw the creation of films, posters, and radio programs designed to dehumanize Jewish people. He commissioned movies like The Eternal Jew, a vile propaganda film that portrayed Jews as subhuman parasites. He approved cartoons and children's books that taught young Germans to hate. He wrote speeches that blamed Jews for every problem Germany faced, from economic struggles to military losses. And he didn't just approve these materials from a distance, he was intimately involved. Goebbels would review scripts line by line, editing dialogue to make it more venomous. He would watch rough cuts of films and demand they be made more extreme. He attended rallies where he whipped crowds into frenzies of hatred, his voice rising and falling with calculated emotion, his words carefully chosen to ignite rage and fear. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't ignorance or blind loyalty. It was deliberate, methodical evil. Around midday, Goebbels would often meet with filmmakers, actors, and artists. He saw himself as a cultured man, someone who appreciated art and cinema. He loved movies and fancied himself a film critic and creative director. He would give notes on Nazi propaganda films as if he were running a Hollywood studio, obsessing over lighting, music, and pacing. He wanted propaganda to be entertaining, to be seductive, so that people would absorb the lies without even realizing they were being manipulated. But behind this veneer of culture was something sinister. Goebbels used his position to exploit young actresses. He was a serial adulterer who leveraged his power to coerce women into relationships. He would promise roles in films, threaten to destroy careers, and manipulate vulnerable women who had no ability to say no. His wife Magda knew about many of these affairs, and their marriage was filled with tension and dysfunction. Yet publicly, they presented themselves as the ideal Nazi family, devoted, loyal, and pure. It was all a lie, just like everything else Goebbels produced. Lunch was usually taken at his office or at home, and it was during these quieter moments that Goebbels would write in his diary. He kept incredibly detailed journals throughout his entire life, documenting his thoughts, his schemes, and his views on the war. These diaries reveal a man who was deeply insecure, obsessed with Hitler's approval, and consumed by jealousy toward other Nazi leaders. He constantly worried about his standing, about whether Hitler still valued him, about whether others were gaining more influence. Despite his power, Goebbels was never truly confident. He needed validation, and he got it by proving his loyalty through ever more extreme acts of propaganda and cruelty. In the afternoons, Goebbels would return to meetings or spend time preparing for speeches. He was one of the Nazi Party's most effective public speakers, second only to Hitler himself. He understood rhythm, emotion, and psychological manipulation. He knew when to whisper and when to shout, when to pause for effect, and when to unleash a torrent of words. His speeches were performances, carefully rehearsed and devastatingly effective. As the war dragged on and Germany began losing, Goebbels' role became even darker. He pushed the concept of total war, urging every German to sacrifice everything for the Nazi cause. He created propaganda that glorified death, that told soldiers and civilians alike that dying for Hitler was the highest honor. He spread lies about miracle weapons that would turn the tide of the war, giving false hope to a desperate population. He continued to blame Jews even as they were being systematically murdered in concentration camps. Camps whose existence he was fully aware of and supported. Evenings often found Goebbels either at home with his Sykes children, whom he used as propaganda tools, presenting them in films and photos as the perfect Aryan family, or attending events with Hitler and other top Nazis. He loved being close to Hitler, loved the prestige and the access. He would sit through Hitler's long, rambling monologues, nodding and agreeing, always the loyal servant. But in his diary, he sometimes expressed frustration with Hitler's decisions, though he would never dare voice these thoughts. Goebbels rarely went to bed before midnight. He would spend late hours reading, writing, or watching films. Even his leisure time was soaked in propaganda. He couldn't separate himself from his work because he had become his work. A man whose entire identity was built on lies, manipulation, and hatred. By the end of the war, as the Nazi regime collapsed, Goebbels remained fanatically loyal. In the final days in Hitler's bunker, while others tried to flee or negotiate surrender, Goebbels stayed. And in one of history's most horrifying acts, he and his wife Magda poisoned their 6 children, ranging in age from 4 to 12, before taking their own lives. He chose murder and suicide over facing the consequences of his crimes. So what did Joseph Goebbels actually do all day? He woke early, read obsessively, and spent every waking hour weaving lies, spreading hatred, and manipulating millions. He didn't just support the Nazi regime, he gave it a voice, a message, and a false reality that led to unimaginable suffering. When you think of Pol Pot, you probably imagine a man responsible for one of history's darkest chapters, the killing fields of Cambodia, where nearly 2 million people died in just 4 years. But what did this man actually do every single day? Did he personally oversee the murders, or did he hide away in secret bases while others carried out his orders? What did he eat for breakfast while families were being torn apart? Did he ever show emotion, or was he cold and distant even to those closest to him? Behind the face of the Khmer Rouge was a daily life more paranoid, more isolated and stranger than most people know. Unlike many dictators who lived in grand palaces, Pol Pot spent most of his time hidden in the jungles of Cambodia. Even when he controlled the entire country from 1975 to 1979, he rarely stayed in one place for long. He moved between secret bases, always afraid that someone might try to kill him or that foreign enemies were closing in. Most mornings, Pol Pot woke up around 6 or 7 in the morning. This was earlier than leaders like Hitler or Stalin, but his reasons were different. He didn't wake early because he was energetic or hardworking. He woke early because he was deeply paranoid and believed that staying alert kept him safe. His sleeping quarters were always simple. Even when he had power, he refused luxury. He slept on a wooden bed with a thin mattress covered by a mosquito net. There were no fancy decorations, no paintings on the walls. Everything around him was plain and controlled, just like the society he was trying to build. Each morning, an aide would bring him a simple breakfast. Unlike Hitler, who was a strict vegetarian, Pol Pot ate whatever was available, usually rice porridge, sometimes with a bit of fish or vegetables. He wasn't picky about food, but he also didn't enjoy it. Eating was just something he had to do to stay alive. He dressed in the same black pajama-style uniform that all Khmer Rouge members wore. This was intentional. By dressing like everyone else, he wanted to appear as though he was just another revolutionary, not a dictator. But everyone knew the truth. Pol Pot held all the power and no one dared to question him. After breakfast, Pol Pot would usually meet with a small group of his closest advisors. These weren't open discussions where people shared different opinions. Instead, They were careful, tense meetings where everyone agreed with whatever Pol Pot said. Disagreeing with him even slightly could mean death. His most trusted ally was a man named Nuon Chea, who acted as his second-in-command. Another key figure was Tamak, a brutal military leader known as the Butcher because of how many people he killed without hesitation. Then there was Khieu Samphan, who served as the public face of the regime while Pol Pot stayed hidden in the shadows. What most people don't know is that Pol Pot rarely gave direct orders to kill specific individuals. Instead, he created a system where paranoia did the work for him. He would make vague statements like, "We must eliminate the hidden enemies within," or "Traitors are everywhere, even among us." His commanders would then interpret these words as permission to arrest, torture, and execute anyone they suspected. He kept detailed records of everything. The Khmer Rouge documented their own crimes obsessively. At the S-21 prison in Phnom Penh, guards took photographs of every prisoner before they were killed. They wrote down confessions, most of them forced through torture. Pol Pot believed that keeping records proved they were fighting. During these morning meetings, Pol Pot would also review reports from different zones of Cambodia. His country was divided into regions, and each region had a leader who reported back to him. If a region failed to meet its rice production goals, Pol Pot didn't see it as a problem with his policies. He saw it as sabotage. He would then order investigations, which almost always led to arrests and executions. Pol Pot spent much of his afternoons reading and writing. He saw himself as an intellectual, a philosopher who was creating a perfect society based on his own version of communism. But his ideas were twisted and extreme. He had been educated in France in the 1950s, where he became interested in communist ideas. But unlike other communist leaders who focused on workers in cities, Pol Pot hated cities entirely. He believed that cities were corrupt, that intellectuals were dangerous, and that the only pure people were poor farmers who worked in the rice fields. When the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia in 1975, one of Pol Pot's first actions was to empty the cities. Within days, millions of people were forced to leave their homes in Phnom Penh and other cities and march into the countryside. Families were separated. The sick and elderly were left behind to die. Anyone who resisted was shot. Pol Pot watched these reports come in with no visible emotion. He didn't seem to care about the suffering. In his mind, this was necessary. He was building a new Cambodia, and anyone who didn't fit into his vision had to be removed. In the afternoons, he often worked on speeches and writings, though most of these were never shared publicly. Pol Pot was obsessed with secrecy. For the first 2 years of his rule, the outside world didn't even know his real name. He was only known as Brother Number One. Even many people within the Khmer Rouge didn't know what he looked like. He also spent time listening to radio broadcasts from other countries, especially Vietnam, China, and Thailand. He was obsessed with the idea that foreign enemies were plotting against him. This paranoia grew worse over time and led to even more killings inside Cambodia. Lunch was a quiet affair, usually eaten alone or with just 1 or 2 people. Pol Pot didn't enjoy large meals or social gatherings like Hitler did. He preferred silence. He ate quickly and without pleasure, usually more rice, maybe some soup, occasionally fruit. What's chilling is that while he was eating his simple meal, thousands of people across Cambodia were starving to death. His policies had destroyed the country's food supply. People were forced to work in the fields from sunrise to sunset with almost no food. Families were separated, children were taken from their parents, and anyone caught stealing even a handful of rice could be killed. Pol Pot knew this was happening. He received reports, but he didn't see it as a failure. He saw it as a test. In his mind, the Cambodian people needed to be purified through suffering. He believed that only by stripping away everything, family, religion, education, even personal identity, Could a new, perfect society be built? One thing most people don't know is that Pol Pot had a family. He was married to a woman named Che Guevara, who had once been a teacher. But their relationship was strange and distant. She suffered from mental illness, likely made worse by the horrors happening around her. Pol Pot rarely spoke about her, and they spent little time together. Later, he secretly married a much younger woman named Mia Sun, but he kept this hidden even from most of his inner circle. In the late afternoons, Pol Pot would sometimes take walks around the compound where he was staying. These weren't long, peaceful strolls like Hitler enjoyed in the mountains. Instead, they were short, cautious walks where he was always surrounded by armed guards. He was terrified of being assassinated. He never stayed in the same place for more than a few weeks. Even within his own camps, he moved between different buildings, sleeping in a different bed almost every night. He trusted almost no one. During these walks, he would sometimes talk to his guards or aides, but these weren't real conversations. He would lecture them about the revolution, about the importance of staying loyal, about the enemies lurking in the shadows. The people around him learned to stay quiet and nod. Speaking too much or saying the wrong thing could be deadly. Pol Pot also had a strange hobby that few people know about. He loved listening to traditional Cambodian music and watching classical Khmer dance performances. Even as he was destroying Cambodian culture, forcing people to forget their past and abandon their traditions, he privately enjoyed the very culture he was trying to erase. This contradiction didn't seem to bother him. Evenings were when Pol Pot held more meetings, often going late into the night. These meetings were different from the ones in the morning, more secretive, more intense. This was when decisions about purges were made. The Khmer Rouge didn't just kill people they saw as enemies from outside. They killed their own members constantly. Pol Pot was convinced that traitors had infiltrated the movement. He believed that Vietnam had planted spies, that the CIA was working against him, that even his closest allies might betray him. So he created a culture of terror within his own ranks. People were encouraged to report on each other. If someone seemed too friendly with the wrong person, or if they questioned an order, they could be arrested. Many high-ranking Khmer Rouge officials who had been with Pol Pot since the beginning were later tortured and killed on his orders. One of the most disturbing facts is that Pol Pot almost never showed anger or emotion. People who met him described him as soft-spoken, even polite. He smiled often, he never raised his voice. But behind that calm exterior was a man responsible for ordering the deaths of nearly 2 million people, roughly a quarter of Cambodia's population. During these evening meetings, Pol Pot would sit quietly, listening to reports about arrests and executions. He would nod, ask a few questions, and then move on to the next topic. Killing had become routine, just another part of running the country. Unlike Hitler, who loved watching movies late into the night, Pol Pot had no interest in entertainment. He didn't watch films, didn't listen to music for pleasure, didn't read novels. His entire life revolved around control and survival. Most nights, he stayed up late reading reports or writing in notebooks. He kept journals, though most of them were destroyed or lost after his regime fell. In these writings, he reflected on his vision for Cambodia, on the enemies he believed were everywhere, and on his place in history. He saw himself as a great revolutionary, someone who would be remembered as a hero who saved Cambodia from corruption and foreign influence. He genuinely believed that the suffering he caused was necessary, that the killings were justified, and that future generations would thank him. But the reality was very different. By 1978, Vietnam had had enough of the Khmer Rouge's attacks on their border. In January 1979, Vietnamese forces invaded Cambodia and quickly defeated Pol Pot's army. He fled back into the jungle and his regime collapsed. Even after losing power, Pol Pot continued to live in hiding for nearly 20 more years. He never faced trial for his crimes. He never expressed regret. He died in 1998, still claiming that everything he had done was right. So what did Pol Pot actually do all day? He woke early out of fear, not discipline. He held meetings where no one dared disagree. He read reports of starvation and mass murder with no visible emotion. He moved from place to place, always paranoid, always hidden. He believed he was building a perfect society, but instead, he created one of the most brutal regimes in human history. Behind the quiet voice and the calm smile was a man who saw human life as expendable, who trusted no one, and who destroyed an entire country in the name of an impossible dream. So here's a question for you. How does someone like Pol Pot convince himself that what he's doing is right, even as millions die around him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into history interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.